3, 2, 1.
Happy hump day, you beautiful badass. Welcome to the Carrie Croft Show. I'm your host, Carrie Croft, bringing you the coolest stories to give your week that little extra something. And remember, the cream always rises to the top, so shake off the haters and be the cream, baby. Ready to elevate your self-care game? Boss Gal Beauty Bar is a modern med spa offering everything from cosmetic injectables, lasers and microneedling, to medical-grade facials and skincare. Conveniently located in Clintonville, Grandview, Powell, and Easton, making self-care a priority has never been easier. Use code CROFT for $25 off your first visit.
Ellie, last week, and now you get the Carrie Croft Show. It's like the highs and the lows, baby. The big fish and the small fish.
No way, just going up the hill, baby. Going up the hill.
You know what? You're right. That is so right. Well, it's nice to formally meet you.
Yes, pleasure.
Yeah. So welcome to the Carrie Croft Show.
Thank you.
And it is funny how I am a firm believer in the universe and kind of like sitting back and just letting things organically happen. And it's funny, when I started this show, I've always been into music. I'm not musically inclined. I have a guitar in here that collects dust, but I love music and I love people performing in here. I did it a couple times, and then next thing you know, these people were like reaching out to me to have musicians on the show, and I'm like, this is cool. So now here we are, connected by Julie.
Julie's amazing. There
are several things that are intriguing about you as I started to deep dive, knowing that, we were going to have this conversation. I was like, I love the fact that I can find him on LinkedIn. And that's so great. I'm like, it's such a juxtaposition. Like, here you are, like, I knew you as, fight for fighting, like, rock star. And then I'm like, hold on a minute. He's on LinkedIn, and they are what are you, like the biggest manufacturer for shopping carts or something?
No, we're not the biggest one, but we're one of the 3 large domestic suppliers in the U.S. So yeah, I know it is so funny.
It really is, and it's interesting too, because I was like, what's up with the wheels on the shopping carts, John? Yeah. Like, how do we get the wheels to not, every time, I feel like it's like a 40% chance that I grab a cart and it's got a bum wheel.
Well, I'll tell you, the wheels on shopping carts are actually very well made. But if you left them in the stores, they'd last for 30 years. But when they get out in the parking lots and kind of go over, especially if the parking lots are not well kind of maintained, they kind of get, they get bent, broken up. But it is a chronic problem. No, maybe we'll figure out how to make a levitating shopping cart without wheels one day.
like a hovercraft.
Luke Skywalker.
Well, it's funny. How you talk a lot about, I'm like one step away from like, plan B, which I feel like that's like a thing people who create or are living in their art. It's like, oh my God, I have to have this like fallback plan. So you always had this kind of, was it the family business in your mind? Like, okay, if this doesn't work, I'm going to do this. Or was there something else? I know you're a math major. What were you going to do if like, okay, it all implodes. Nobody likes my music. I can't do this. What was that going to be?
I think, getting the math degree was basically that, in that if I needed to go get a job, that having that degree, a lot of people hire math majors because they think they're smart, whether they are or not. And the family business was great when I was pursuing music because it allowed me to kind of make my own schedule. If I had an audition, if I had to go to the studio, but then, my dad got a guy at a pretty cheap rate to do a lot of things for the family. So I don't know. I do have a lot of other interests besides, the manufacturing, the family business. So yeah. I think I probably would have, explored some other things if music didn't work out, maybe teaching. But certainly, it's been a blessing having Precision Wire, and now my son works with us, and my dad's still running the show at 85 years old. And so it's great to work with your family in this window. And it's a challenging,
right.
It's very challenging to have a manufacturing business in California. Most businesses have left, but it's fun, and we have folks that have been with us for 30, 40 years, many that kind of were my boss, 35 years ago. So it's like your second family.
Speaking of that, I feel like a dummy when it comes to politics. So I don't usually talk about it. But what are your thoughts about people leaving and like being a resident there with how astute you are? What are your everyday thoughts where you're like, what's happening?
Yeah, as someone who's born and raised in California, it's just very sad. It's such a beautiful state. 40 years ago, it was the center of kind of innovation and manufacturing and business. And unfortunately, I think the political kind of landscape here has become so business unfriendly. Not just there's kind of taxes and rules. It's really become a litigious state where it's kind of set up for lawyers to go after businesses for very kind of, in my mind, ridiculous reasons. And it is sad that so many businesses have left and so many people have left. And of course, then the inner cities have really become, in some cases, hard to live in. San Francisco, for example, it's with the homeless crisis and the kind of um, lack of following up and punishing crime and kind of the flash mobs. So it's dangerous to live here unless you're kind of in tech or you're in government. It's tough to sometimes get a job that you like, and the cost of living is insane.
Right.
So the cost of living is crazy. It's like New York City. So many people are like, why am I paying all this money, paying all this taxes, and the life, that the life experience that folks had 20, 30 years ago, that doesn't really exist in most places. So I think it's just very sad. And you see that, you see people leaving, not just California, but you see people leaving New York. And so there's a lot of reasons people leave, but we just opened a facility in Texas for that exact reason, because we're not sure we can sustain the business here, which is so
Oh,
sad.
yeah.
Um, and but you look at Boise, Idaho, you look at Florida, you look at Montana. Um, Everybody's kind of going to those states because they're great places to live. Many have very low taxes. The cost of living is lower, and the life experience is great. The schools are great. So it bums me out as a Californian, but it's something we've kind of been dealing with at Precision Wire for decades
Yeah,
now.
I can imagine. So there's a lot of things about your personality that I resonate with truly. And I think resilience is one of the
Mhm.
underpinnings, and hearing your story and just I can picture you going back a couple of decades and just like being this songwriter and wanting one to hit so badly and being like, am I good? Do I suck? Am I awesome? Is this the
Yeah,
dumb? I mean, this constant sort of internal turmoil that we go through, but I feel like drives us forward. And I
yeah,
was listening to your TED talk, and you talked about how like creations can come from frustration and pain and like the dark sides, and that's oftentimes like where these moments come from. But what I really loved that you said was about inspiration can be nurtured by that chip on your shoulder, especially if you feel like you have something to say. And like that to me, I think is a testament to sort of your playbook, right? I mean, you've done a lot of really cool stuff and you've had some really great hits, but like you also do, your songs are in, like, is it The Blind Side? I like all of your music, but that I would say if I had to pick one, it's Chances, right? I
yeah,
love that song.
yeah,
And you have these
yeah.
beautiful melodies, but now you're kind of parlaying into TV and doing all these things. Talk a little bit about like, were you just born with this resilience, or was it half taught? Usually things are half environment and half sort of like DNA. But man, you took a lot of hits and just a lot of rejection, right? It becomes sort of like the everyday, but still you persisted.
That's an interesting question. I haven't really thought about that. I am, a 15-year overnight success,
Right.
right? I grinded for a long time. I didn't, Superman was not a hit till I was my late 20s, which is very rare. So I do think a lot, and I've talked to some friends about this. I think at a certain point, it wasn't even about music. It was like, I'm either going to win or I'm going off the cliff. I'm going to take it to the very end. And I think any artist, they just want to be heard. Superman, it's not easy to be me. I've learned it's pretty easy to be me. But as a young songwriter, when it's your whole life and your passion, you just want, as you said, just let an audience hear me, make their judgment, and then I can like kind of live, sleep well at night knowing that I had my opportunity. So there's this quote I love from Steve Jobs that says, half the difference between a successful entrepreneur and an unsuccessful entrepreneur is pure perseverance. And I believe that. And it certainly doesn't just apply to music. And I do think having that chip on your shoulder can motivate us, as long as we don't let us totally, as long as the chip is not 2,000 pounds, right? It can't bring us totally down. And then we start making excuses, and it's not my fault, and the world hates me. But you see it in sports all the time, right? We kind of use the rejection to push us forward, and however we do that mentally to give us energy to keep doing it. So yeah, I think for me, a lot of my success has nothing to do with talent. It has much more to do with perseverance, but also relationships. Building relationships throughout my career, especially early on, where there were people that wanted me to win, that were giving me an extra swing, and so many of those folks, particularly this one woman, Charisse, who was a program director at in a station in Vegas. I tell this story because I think it's important people to understand how tenuous life can be. Superman struggled at radio when it came out. It was the late '90s, early 2000, Lilith Fair, boy bands, grunge music. It wasn't '77. Billy Joel and Elton John were not dominating radio. The piano was not on the radio, so nobody really wanted to play Superman, and it was struggling at radio. And one week, it kind of started to go backwards on the charts, which usually is the death knell because everybody starts dropping your record. But this woman, Charisse, I had known her for a long time. I'd done many events for her, played in her conference room for her listeners, played many fundraisers. I actually, we call them dog and pony shows. I actually played a dog show for her. So I'd done all this stuff for her, and we become good friends. And she, she believed in my song. She believed in what I was doing. And when everything started to go backwards, she said, I'm going to give it another week, and I'm going to give it another week. And eventually the song became top 5 on a radio station, but it took a long time because Superman was different. Sometimes we need to hear things a little bit more to have it resonate. And because she, was such a passionate person, she told a lot of her friends in radio, and the song started going back up the charts. So this whole thing, the fact that we're even talking today, this Superman song that became this thing for 9/11 and still, is a song that you hear today, that really was because of a relationship I had. And that's how tenuous, success can be.
And those just sliding door moments too, where it's like you never know the little things, like you always say, the little things and the big things. And I think people get lost and forget that like something, like every single day you got a shot. And to make one little thing happen. It doesn't have to be this all or nothing big thing. It's like one little brick in the wall that day. And that was Charisse, right? Like that was like one day.
Yeah.
And like you have all these bricks, and it's like you don't realize it until you look back and you're like, whoa, I have a song that is like now an anthem that is going to be timeless. Right. And then it becomes this anthem for 9/11. And that had to be, very unexpected for you, but what a huge highlight and what a huge coup to like, I mean, what did that feel like when you got to perform, with all those legends? Like, were you just like, wait, where am I? What's happening? I mean, what a gift.
It was all that. It was massive fear.
Right.
My little trailer at Madison Square Garden was right next to the Who, and every living icon I kind of grew up listening to was on that stage. And of course, any other day of my life, it would have been a dream, a dream. But, we were there for a different reason, right? And meeting with the families who lost loved ones at 9/11, the firefighters. So I think that gave me a certain grounding sense. So I was able to kind of at least push the kind of fanboy off the grid for a minute. But yeah, it was incredibly humbling. It still is. you have this kind of dichotomy of nobody would ever want, a song, to become, have that stature because of, the biggest atrocity on our country in our lifetime. But Superman had already become, it was on its way to becoming a worldwide hit. It was number one in many other countries. And I was actually in London on 9/11, and I didn't realize what was happening with the song till I got back, and saw many of the news organizations using it to recognize the heroes. And it also, I think that concert was kind of a defining moment in my mentality on what music is, because you want fame and fortune, you want to be on MTV, you want to sell tickets, you want people to sing your songs. And I was that guy like everybody else and wanted to be a rock star. But that experience when I saw groups like the Who, like blow the roof off Madison Square Garden, and you saw 20,000 people who'd been down at ground zero really digging through the rubble, just unimaginable experience. You see them crying, and you see them singing, and you see them for the first time releasing their pain, and being able to kind of just have a moment of kind of solace and togetherness. When you see that, you're like, okay, that's what this is really about, this whole thing. So when you have a song like that, I think it maybe changes your mentality about, okay, why am I doing this? Especially now, in my career where I'm not having songs on the radio, I'm not making records, but I'm having songs that resonate in other ways, maybe more important ways. I think that experience at the concert in New York that led to me going out with our troops and many relationships I have, and USO tours, and I think that's really kind of a fulcrum in my career.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine that would be. I'm trying to picture myself in that moment where you're like, I'm here under the most horrible circumstances, seeing these legends. Like, it would be a very grounding, surreal moment. Who were you though? Like, deep down, were you like fanboying over the most? Where you're like, I can't believe I'm here with, like, I mean, you had to be like in your trailer going, holy shit, like.
Yeah, I mean, there was a moment. It was funny at the very end of the show. People, of my generation will remember Paul McCartney put on the Concert for New York. Right, it was his vision, and at the end, he was going to close with "Let It Be." Right, and so I was not going to go out and sing that with him. I was like, I'm this little guy. I am not worthy. I am not worthy, but I'll always be grateful. John Bon Jovi, and I think it was Melissa Etheridge, kind of came backstage to grab me, and they said, "We're gonna go," and I'm like, "No, I can't." They go, "You're good. That you have that song. We're gonna go." So they dragged me backstage, and Paul McCartney was playing some other song, I forget, but I was backstage with everybody was there, every living icon. They were all there, and I knew I couldn't go to each and every one of them because that would have been totally ridiculous. But the first one I went to was Billy Joel because that was my first concert I ever saw. Mr. Joel, hi, I'm this guy, say the song, thank you for everything. I was at the Glass Houses concert at the Forum in, 1984. And he's like, I remember that show, Liberty DeVito missed the drum fill, something like that. And I'm like, that's crazy. And then I went to Mr. Townsend, Mr. Townsend, Tommy's been in my CD player for 20 years. Thank you. And he's all right. Great. Good. Nice to meet you, Rod. And then I went to Eric Clapton, who now I kind of regret after some of his actions in the last few months. But at the time, I was like a huge Clapton fan, Mr. Clapton, and he was very nice. And then off we went to sing with Paul McCartney. So those were the three I picked.
I mean, if I were you in that trailer, I have to be like looking in the mirror, like, I'm John motherfucking Ondrasik, like looking in the mirror, like pumping myself up, because really, I mean, they're just people, right? And you're on that stage for a reason. That's incredible. But speaking of Let It Be, you said something that I thought I chuckled because it's so true. I mean, not I don't know anything about songwriting, but just when you think you do something really great, you're like, you think you wrote Let It Be at 3 a.m. And then you wake up and you're like, let it go back to the drawing board. It's kind of like when you sing in the car with, like, when I sing with the Cranberries, I think I have like the best voice ever. And then all of a sudden you sing by yourself. You're like, wait, this is not lining up. Right. So I'm so intrigued by the songwriting process, because I can imagine that every day there's something that inspires you and you're kind of like, oh, that might be a good. So like, just like you were talking about writing 100 years. So it took you
Yeah.
45 minutes to write Superman, but then was it 3 months to write 100 years? And you like,
Yeah. And it took, yeah.
because that was kind of you talking about when you have kids, now all of a sudden you're like, well, shit, I only have 100 years feels not like a lot of time. And you mentioned that your daughter had said, I just love you. And that
Yeah.
became, your song. So, I mean, are you constantly finding just inspiration on the daily where you have to kind of turn it off? You're like, okay, John, like, or do you just have to let it flow no matter where and when, and just make sure you have like a pen and paper?
Yeah. I think certainly, so much of the writing process is discipline. I'd like to say it's so romantic, and I'm not Elton and Paul McCartney. Very few of us are that prolific where we can, sit down and write a classic and have 60 songs people now. And so much of it is throwing darts, right? Just writing hundreds of songs to maybe get one or two people know. I've written thousands of songs, but you're right. I think you always have to be on the lookout. And I certainly when I was, really in my zone, writing 100, 200 songs a year, um, I would always kind of have that kind of mentality, and I still do. You're walking by, you hear somebody say something, and you're like, oh, that could be a song title, and you put it in your little note. I have my little spreadsheet of song ideas, song titles, but so much of it is just writing, just the process of writing and writing song after song. And when you don't want to write, when you're exhausted, and you're just burnt out, just keep pushing, and maybe you come up with something, and going back to the drawing board, and learning to edit yourself. Basically what I would do, because I think the kind of free flow of the imagination is important. I would just sit at the piano and I would just record myself. I don't know what I was doing, writing, playing bits, singing ideas, and then I would later go back and listen to it and try to pick out bits. Because what I didn't want to do is I'm writing and then, oh, that might be good. Let me stop and write that down and let me think about that. I just wanted the free flow of information. So I would spend the day at my piano, or the night, and the next day I'd go for a hike, put on my headphones and listen to what I did before. And most of the time you're like, nah, there's nothing there. But every once in a while there might be a germ. Maybe it's a melody, maybe it's a lyric, maybe it's a phrase. And you're like, okay, here's something to start, and you take that as far as it can go. So so much of this stuff is not romantic. Superman was a gift. 45 minutes, that doesn't happen.
Build the family of your dreams with reproductive gynecology and infertility. RGI's expert physician team has over 30 years of experience offering personalized fertility treatment plans tailored just for you. Get started today. Your future family awaits. Book now at rgiohio.com.
Wrote that? What were you doing? What spawned that?
I was just sitting, in my little room with a little keyboard, like I was doing every day, and writing songs. I think, as we said kind of earlier, the sentiment of it's not easy to be me, because I was frustrated. I wasn't being heard, and I was pounding my head on the music business. I think that certainly kind of fell into it. But I think that the key to that song was the symbolism of Superman doesn't want to be Superman. That's what separates my Superman from all the other Superman songs. I can't stand to fly. Who wouldn't want to fly? And so I think that kind of taking this iconic figure, this person who's indestructible, the hero, um, never cries unless there's kryptonite. I think that kind of imagery really kind of spurred the song. And what sometimes songs start with a concept. 100 Years started with the concept, right? You talked about 100 years. Certainly, we all understand live in the moment, appreciate the moment, the cliche, but that one had the kind of the hook and the structure of, okay, here's our life, and here's kind of the stages of our life. And but wherever we are is where we are. And
Right.
so a lot of things I'm saying, people say every day. You just kind of say them in a unique way that maybe they haven't heard before. So, and as I mentioned, the Riddle, which was another one of my popular songs, that took a year to write because I kept feeling I never got it right, and I kept going back to the drawing board. I'd leave it for like a month, and I come back to it. So certain songs, certain songs are a grind, and certain songs are a gift.
But then you have to push yourself though, like when you said you just push through it, or do you allow for yourself where you're like, if this isn't really working, you have to like step away from it for a while? Or is it the discipline where you're like, no, you sit back down, and if nothing comes out, you're still building that muscle?
I think it has to have the discipline because it's so hard to write a song that can be popular and also stand the test of time. And I think if you kind of wait for it to happen, it may never happen. Now there are tools you can do. Like if I like to, especially back in the day, I would go to other places. I would change my environment. Right, I'd go to Lake Tahoe. I'd write up there, and the songs I'd be writing in Tahoe would be different than ones I'd be writing in my studio. I'd collaborate with other people. So there's ways to kind of keep the energy going. You read a book or you see a movie that inspires you, and then maybe you're like, oh, maybe there's something in that there's a song there. When I'm writing for film and television, the nice thing about that is you kind of have your homework. Okay, you're not starting from a blank slate. So The Blind Side was different because that song existed. But so there's a lot of tools, I think, to kind of either fool yourself or inspire yourself to find energy to continue the process. But yeah, a lot of it is just grinding and having the will to go a little further and push a little further than everybody else who's in frankly your competitors.
Yeah. So I read that your wife, Carla,
Hmm.
plucked you out of a dive bar.
It's a piano bar. Yeah, my wife
Piano bar? Okay,
on
so how
Melrose and Vine, believe it or not.
so give me a little backdrop on that. So how pivotal has she been, like, to give you confidence? And is she like I can imagine her kind of like being this like hype girl and like being like, you got this, you can do this, or hey, this isn't that great, or how are we going to finesse this? Like, what has that really, first of all, give me a little background, like when you did meet her, like did she just like come up to you, she's like, hello John?
Pretty much. I mean, I was playing this little piano bar on Melrose in Los Angeles, and there'd be 5 or 6 people there. A couple of them I probably paid to be there, and I had made some demos, and I actually my girlfriend at the time was working at Motown, believe it or not, and as a secretary. And Carla was a very successful publisher, Carla Berkowitz, and she was a music publisher and huge artist, huge hits. And she happened to be at Motown pitching some songs to Motown executives. And she heard through the wall some of my demos, and she's like, "What's that?" And the guy said, "Oh, it's the secretary's boyfriend. He's got nothing going on." And she's like, "Really?" And she's like, "Yeah, I think he plays at a piano bar, every Tuesday or something." So, being a good executive that Carla was, she ended up coming to a show, and afterwards she came up to me, and like you said, it's like she was in this black leather jacket, smoking a cigarette, and say, "Hi, I'm Carla, and I work for EMI Publishing, and I get people record deals." And I'd heard that before, Carrie, you hear that a lot in this business. But she was very attractive, and I'm like, well, we should work together. And it was a very long process, Again, she was kind of a queen in the world, and she kind of took me under her wing, and she said, "You don't have the song yet. Go write, keep bringing me stuff." And one day, I'd written a song that was much different than everything I've been writing. It was called Love Song, and it was about divorce from the perspective of a small child. So it was a sad song. And I remember I wasn't even going to play for her because I'm like, this song will never be on the radio. It's not that song. But I played it for her one night, and she said, "That's the song." And I'm like, "Really?" And she says, "That song makes me feel. That song makes me sad. That song makes me cry. And that song actually led to a record deal with EMI Records. And a couple of years into our relationship, as I say, she saw the light, and all of a sudden our relationship became, not just wannabe songwriter and music executive, but she's been my rock through this whole career. It's been great because she was there at the beginning. She really kicked it off. So this has been a journey for both of us, and in the bad times, in the good times. And to your point, yes, she has no problem telling me my song sucks. And
Right. She's like, listen, John, I love you,
yeah.
but that's got to hit the cutting room floor.
Well, and I've learned over the years where I don't really play anything for her till it's almost done, because I don't want to, number one, I don't want to have a fight for a week. Number two,
Right.
I don't want her to like cut my legs out from under me. And funny story, and you heard this in the keynote, but I this is, I love the story is, after Superman, there was so much pressure to write another song that was a hit. And it's very hard when you have a song that big as your first song. And most artists tend to like just regurgitate the hit. They kind of write the same song. And I didn't want to do that. So I went through 2 years of trying to write the follow-up to Superman, and the record company got all mad at me and everybody was, freaking out. And I had the bones of 100 Years. And I remember I was very scared to play it for her because I'm like, if she doesn't like it, I'll throw it in the trash. And I played her a sketch, and I looked at her and she was crying. I remember thinking, well, either I wrote a hit or my career is over. But she knew.
Yeah.
I mean, she knew. And but yeah, she's still my rock. She's my biggest fan. We'll be married 27 years this September. We have 2 wonderful children, and we'll
That's
be
amazing.
after this interview, we're going to go swimming. So
Oh, that's great.
she's my best friend. Yeah.
Good. Going back to what prompted you to write a song about divorce from a small child's perspective?
Well, so much of songwriting is observation, things you see.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a neighbor. I lived in a townhouse in Van Nuys, and I had a neighbor with a young daughter who they'd been divorced, and I would play with the little girl, and she was my friend. And I kind of just saw that the struggle that the child was going through. So many of my songs, are about observation. Things don't happen to me, but things that you see, things that move you, good, bad, or ugly. And yeah, so that was the song that really, got things going.
Yeah. Going back to like classic rock type
Yeah.
genre, who were your big? Because I'm a big music gal, and I'm not that much younger than you.
Yeah.
What are you, mid 50s?
I'm 59. Yeah.
Oh, so I'm late for. So you got about a decade on me,
Yeah.
but I'm pretty. I mean, my dad used to play all kinds of. So I feel like I always had this weird. My mom was like, "How do you know that? How do you know the words to this? How do you know this song?" I don't. I just always listen. So I just all the 70s rock, all the like Journey, Loverboy, like who made you feel like, John motherfucking Ondrasik, like for the first time, like who made you feel that the first time?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I loved classic rock, and the singer-songwriters of the 70s are still, my golden age, and many people's golden age. You still hear the songs. But yeah, I mean, certainly I had my Led Zeppelin phase, many times. The singers, the great singers, as you mentioned, Steve Perry. I actually tried to find his voice teacher for years. I ended up finding his voice teacher. To me, him and Freddie Mercury were the 2 amazing voices. So certainly Queen. But I loved AC/DC. I loved REO Speedwagon.
Oh,
But I also loved, I loved Prince. I loved Stevie Wonder was my first record I ever got. I love the R&B. I love Marvin Gaye, and then throw in Joni Mitchell and Billy and Elton, James Taylor. But yeah, I mean, I love watching David Lee Roth do his karate kicks, during Panama. So yeah, I grew up in that great age, kind of we both did, where everything wasn't so segmented. You listened to the radio, and you would hear Journey, and then you would hear Prince, and then you would maybe hear James Taylor. It was just great songs. They're just great songs. So I had this kind of weird, almost famous experience out of college, that I was living in Malibu, and I met a guy named Rudy Sarzo. And Rudy was a bass player, and he played with Ozzy Osbourne. He played with Quiet Riot, and at the time he was playing with Whitesnake. And he became a mentor of mine. And he would come to the studio. He would help me. He's a wonderful person. And he would take me to Whitesnake gigs. And I was like 22. And at the time, this was like Here I Go Again, Is This Love, Whitesnake like dominating. And
Oh yeah.
I was this little fly on the wall, and I would go to their gigs, and he was very protective of me. He says, "Okay, you can go in that room, but you can't go in that room," and because it was that age, and he's still a great friend, and so I had that kind of experience of kind of seeing what rock stardom was like, hanging out, going up the elevator with Coverdale and that stuff. So it was, and I actually out of college, I joined my first real band it was called John Scott, and it was with all the ex-members of Pat Benatar's band. So I
Yeah.
was 22, they were all 40, they were trying to like survive, and we wrote some songs, and we actually had a manager. We were, we're doing like Bon Jovi rock, and then Nirvana came out, and that whole genre ended in 24 hours.
Kurt Cobain, man, he just
But yeah, what an amazing experience for a young singer songwriter.
Oh man, and a moment for Pat Benatar, please.
Woo!
We belong.
I'll tell you I'll tell you a Pat Benatar story. So it was called John Scott because the other guy was Scott Sheets. He wrote Fire and Ice. He was guitar player forever, and Scott would have these huge Christmas parties at his house, and I would go to the parties, and every year, they call her Patty and Neil, her husband, would be there. And I remember one moment. This is actually another thing that kind of stuck with me forever. This was when Pat Benatar was like Pat Benatar. Hell is for Children. It's like, top 5 star in the world. And I walked into the kitchen, and there's Pat Benatar, this little thing, doing dishes. She's doing all the dishes for the party. And we just sat and talked. And she asked me about what I'm doing and talked about her kids. We didn't talk about music. And I remember thinking, if Pat Benatar can be doing dishes at the Christmas party, it's like, however successful we get, we can still be good people,
No, for sure.
Yeah, and so I've always remembered that, it's like, that's, if I ever have some success, I want to be Pat Benatar and have that kind of grounding nature.
I love that. There's a line from one of my favorite songs. Keep this very simple, but keep my feet on the ground, keep my head in the clouds. And that's what I always think. It's like you gotta, because you never want to stop dreaming. You never want to stop visualizing. But it's like, man, like go out and wash your own car or go hang out and be, good to people. Like be grounded.
Yeah.
No matter what.
And I think for me, that's really what Precision Wire has allowed me to do, because even when I had #1 songs in the country, you go to the factory and people are sweating. They're starting at minimum wage. They're making stuff. It's hot. You have to make a payroll. There's always fires to put out. And I think for me, that was, and it still is, a very grounding experience. And also maybe I have, as I said, a different worldview than many other kind of musicians and artists.
Oh, I feel like you do from just from that perspective alone, having the manufacturing and that side of it, it completely gives you a different view. I mean, it's a very grounding view. What is your last concert you've been to, just as a spectator?
Oh my gosh, I don't go to a lot of them.
You got to you got to get Carla dressed up, and take her out to a show.
She likes to go to jazz shows. When you do like 100 shows a year, it's like the last thing you want to do when you have a day off is go to a concert.
Right.
But I did go see The Who with my son a couple years ago, which was a blast because he's a Who fan. And I toured with the Bare Naked Ladies last summer, and I sat on the stage and watched every one of their shows because they're so fun and so entertaining. But yeah, I don't. It's so weird. It's kind of like actors. I don't know if they go to a lot of movies.
No, you probably and with this, you're gearing up to tour. I'm sure you're probably just kind of enjoying the downtime at this moment.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much downtime. I mean, I have these other songs, the Israel song, that's really kind of impacted globally, and so I'm pretty slammed with
Yeah.
media and obligations. We're putting together some concerts, so there's very little downtime. But yeah, I actually leave tomorrow for a show in Texas on Thursday, and the summer's kicking off, and we're going to be, you know, we're going to be going hard, probably through the middle of October. But it's amazing. It's like, it's a gift.
I just
It's,
saw my first show at Red Rocks 2 weeks ago. It was like bucket list item. And then I just saw Zach Bryan. He's all over the place. Country
who'd you see?
music.
Who'd you see at Red Rocks?
311.
Oh, how was that?
Oh, they're one of my
Yeah.
so 311's one of my all-time favorite bands. And I was like, if they're ever back there, I'm just gonna go front row center. And it was really great. I mean, of
Amazing.
course I'm biased, right?
Oh,
And then Zach Bryan I saw here at Ohio Stadium. And it's really great because 2 years ago, I think it was, he was maybe the opening act for the Country Fest, and then to see his evolution and the way he just rocked that place and how he does this communal revival at the end when he brings up like his people from the set or friends or whoever, and they get on the mic and just like scream all night revival. It's pretty cool, right? It's like a hoedown. Like he takes over and it's like a big old hoedown.
that's wonderful.
Yeah.
No, it's amazing.
So back to your song, Okay. You really have, I mean, you have been all over the news for just how you sort of have stood up and you just speak out about what's happening in the world. And it feels kind of lonely, right?
Well, there's been 3 songs. One was about the Afghanistan withdrawal called Blood on My Hands, that became a voice for many of our Afghan veterans, but was certainly, shunned by the music press. Then I wrote a song about Ukraine, went to Ukraine, performed with Ukrainian orchestra called Can One Man Save the World? I think because of the nature of the Ukraine war, that was kind of more accepted, debuted on Good Morning America and things like that. And then, Okay, We're Not Okay about October 7th. Yeah, it's been very frustrating to see how few artists who claim to stand up for human rights, and many of them like to lecture us on the world, remain silent and can't even say release the hostages. Many of them Jewish. It's really why I think the nature of the song, the message of the song, We're Not Okay, something's definitely broken, is resonating around the world, especially with Jewish people. I'm not Jewish, you don't have to be Jewish to condemn Hamas.
And I wasn't gonna ask that because you had said that's kind of a, you're like, you don't need to be, why are you asking me if I'm Jewish? I'm human.
Yeah.
I don't have to be Jewish to support this.
Yeah. I mean, after 9/11, nobody said,
Right.
Yeah. What is your religion? What is your nationality? I think, evil is evil, and Hamas is evil, and Iran is evil, and what happened October 7th is evil. And the fact we still have 5 I actually have an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal tomorrow talking about the 5 American hostages. I'm old enough to remember 1979 when every house had a yellow ribbon around it because we had hostages, and it was the lead on every news show, and all of America was demanding our hostages get released. I think so many few people maybe not even know the names of our hostages. So the song really, Okay, I think it touches on a lot of the moral collapse of our institutions. Certainly our college campuses have run rampant with anti-Semitism and our kids, and they're huge problems, and to me these songs, the common theme is they're moral messages. They're not political messages, at least in my mind. They're taken politically because we're a tribal society, but Afghanistan, you don't promise people you'll take care of them and you abandon them to terrorists. Ukraine, America tends to, in our history, stand up for democracies facing authoritarian, thugs. Okay, Israel had the worst atrocities since the Holocaust. They're a democracy. They're fighting a war where the combatant to casualty rate's the lowest in history, and we just saw in France, it's really becoming an anti-Semitic nation in Europe and in the United States, and so it's a scary time. And music has a way of cutting through a lot of the BS, especially for our kids. If you look at TikTok and you look at the polls of half of our kids support Hamas over Israel, like how can that be? And a lot of it is because the arts, they get their kind of worldview through Macklemore and these artists, who are kind of Marxist and oppressor, and so the only way you can combat this is through the arts, and you can see how OK has resonated that that this little song from a guy who's kind of over the hill, and I put it on Twitter, has become this kind of thing for the world. So that's why I think the arts are so important. That's why I'm so disappointed with my my fellow musicians and artists, especially of my generation. I understand the young kids are being brainwashed just like they are on the college campuses. But the folks on that stage at the concert for New York, they know better. They know what's going on.
Yeah.
And the fact that they are afraid to say anything is a disgrace. It's this historical disgrace. And I think there's no other way to put it.
Yeah. And speaking of sliding door moments, so you were in Israel performing the night that the drones hit.
Yeah.
So give me the give me the time frame from when you're on stage to when that happened, and then where did the drone did it hit where you were?
So we were in Tel Aviv, and I had a week off between my quartet tours, and I'd been asked to go to Israel a lot in the last few months. And so I said, let's go. And we were going to meet with hostage families, IDF soldiers, Israeli artists, which we did. I spent many hours with hostage families, which, as you can imagine, is just heartbreaking. It's the worst. But they have an event every Saturday night in the middle of Tel Aviv at what they call Hostage Square. Many of the hostage families gather there. They have a big stage. They speak. Thousands of people come. They broadcast it to the country. And they asked me to perform that Saturday night. I was in town. And through the week, there was a lot of talk about Iran attacking. It was in the news. So there was a lot of people talking about it. And I think the whole country was anxious. But everybody was still, the beaches were packed. Everybody was doing their thing. And Saturday night of the Hostage Square performance, right before I played, there was an announcement I had never heard before. The announcement, Carrie, was, in event of missile attack, please take shelter, put your hands over your head, and seek shelter. And nobody left. There are 5,000 people there. And my first thing was, I wanted to run to the hotel and hide in my safe room. And nobody left. And so I performed. It was the closest thing to the concert for New York probably I'll ever do. Hostage families with signs 10 feet in front of me. I spoke. Very humbling, very moving. And when I walked off stage, the leader of the hostage forum, this woman, Rebecca, said, hey, by the way, they're closing the airspace. You need to be in your hotel room by 11 o'clock. It was about 8:30. And so we knew what was going to happen. And so I said to my entourage, my Israeli entourage, and some Americans, I'm like, all right, guys, we need to go to the safe room. And I had my son with me. And this is all you need to know about Israelis. They said, yeah, we know, but we have a dinner reservation. And I'm like, ha, 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 ha. Yeah. They're like, no, we waited 2 weeks for this dinner reservation. We're going. And that's who Israelis are. They're a little crazy, but they've lived under this for so long.
Right.
They have this ability to find joy in the darkest of times. And I'm like, well, let's compromise. Can we have dinner at the hotel? So we did, and we went to the hotel, and I'm just sitting there looking at Twitter, looking what's going on the news, and they're all eating and drinking, and my son's drinking, and they're all, just having a party. And at 11 o'clock, at 10:30, I go, well, I'm going to go to the room, and I go up there, and I'm watching the news, and literally at 11 o'clock, Iran launches the drones. And so I tell everybody, all right, guys, let's go. And they're like, it takes 8 hours for drones to get here. I'm like, you're insane. But so I stayed up all night watching with my son, and it was, look, we were in Tel Aviv, which is kind of the furthest from Iran. But it was unnerving. It was scary, especially when they fired the ballistic missiles. That takes 10 minutes to get there. And So I kind of sat there. My wife was freaking out, and everybody's scared, and understandably. But I'm glad I kind of went through that with them. The next day, everybody's back at work. It's like nothing. And I'm like that. And first of all, in America, half the people would flee to Canada. Everybody else would be buried in their bunkers for 2 months. But it was just such a surreal experience, and to go through that, and with my son there, now that it took us a week to get out, and everybody was very scared, but yeah, it was crazy.
Yeah. Well, so the last thing I want to hit on is, you talk a lot about success and how do you define success, right? And
Yeah.
back at your career, it's like, what is success? Is it selling the most albums, or is it having sort of this vast, rich career, work-life balance? What does it really mean? And when I look at you, and just to pay you a compliment from a stranger from afar, I feel like you get it, right? So like, yeah, you've had hit songs, which is amazing, and what a incredible dopamine hit and an amazing thing to be able to say you did. But then listen to you, like you're traveling across the world to sing for these people who, are just in so much pain. No one else does that right now. You bring your son, you give him that experience. You've got this great family. You're delving into like TV and all these other things. I just think you've created this very rich, diverse, cool, successful existence. And I just think it's really neat.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, I appreciate that. Look, it's we all have our struggles, right? I certainly have my struggles. Certain things have been sacrificed by doing this other stuff, but I do put a priority on family. And I think my dad, he's been a family guy from the beginning. So I think part of it is having your priorities in order.
Yep.
And also seeing, so many amazing people, and meeting people do incredible things, and also seeing people who really struggle, through my songs. I work with ALS patients. I work with Gold Star families. So whenever I feel like, yeah, life sucks for me and this is terrible and woe is me, I've met people who face real challenges, right? And I can be like, yeah, I have no problems. So I think, I say in my keynotes, the key to happiness is having gratitude. And it's easy to say that. Sometimes it's harder to put it into practice, but I do kind of look at it like, yeah, I've lived my dream to have some songs people know. I'm relatively healthy. I have a great family, great kids. I do believe I live in the greatest country that's ever existed on the planet. So the big things are good. And so I and I have my struggles. I have my depression, through COVID, getting the family business through it. I had to go to a therapist. I had to take, medicine to help me. I'm human. I learned it's, we got to do what we got to do. But the last thought I'll leave you with is kind of the last thought I leave in my keynotes. And it took me a long time to figure this out. It took me 20 years. But I think something we forget about is we have to take care of ourselves first before we take care of everybody else. I think a lot of us, want to help folks, help our family, or, help the world. And sometimes we put so much energy into that, it causes us health issues, it causes depression issues. So I've learned, we have to take care of ourselves first, however you do that. And then give ourselves to those, who may need us. So that's something I really try to do as well, is try to like, okay, do a little meditation, eat better.
Are you exercising?
I do, not as much as I like, but yeah, I swim 4 days a week, and I'm trying to run. I think that's so critical to do something physical.
Mm-hmm.
I always sleep better. I think better. I'm smarter. My best ideas come when I'm running or doing something physical. So all those things, that sometimes it's easy to put off because, this is more important. For me, I think I kind of really keep front of mind.
Yep. And grab the free weights too. You got to get the strength training in.
Yeah, I don't know.
You got to stay swole for Carla.
Well, at 60, these elbows and wrists don't work as much as they used to. But the swimming's great, right? Because it's low impact. It's also a great zen, being in the water and and it doesn't put too much stress on the joints. So yeah, me and Carla are going to go for a swim right now, and
I love this
we'll
couple swim for you guys.
yeah, we find things to do together that are healthy for both of us.
Yeah. And before I let you go, so you're touring right now. You're going to be in Cleveland soon, which is really close to me.
Yeah, please come,
Yeah.
be our guest,
Yeah.
bring your family. I'd love to meet everybody. And yeah, we have a couple of shows in July, and then August we're out with the full band, and then September and October we're out with the string quartet. So the next 4 months we'll be doing a ton of shows all over America. All the ticket links and dates are at fiveforfighting.com, and we'll actually be doing some college campuses performances to kind of push back on some of the bullies there, and we're also trying to put together some larger concerts with Israeli artists, Ukrainian artists, Iranian dissidents, to really keep the focus on what's going on in the world.
Well, thank you for being so gracious and jumping on the Carrie Cross show. I know you have a lot of great things going on, so thanks for taking an hour for my community. We really appreciate it.
You're awesome. I loved your questions, and I look forward to next time.
Yeah, and I look forward to meeting you in Cleveland.
Rock on.
All right, John. Thank you. Have a good
Take
one.
care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.